The rain started before dawn, the kind that doesn't stop, just changes moods. It wasn't a storm, not yet, but it had that quiet anger before the thunder starts speaking. The sky was gray, almost the same color as the marble floors in the kitchen. It matched everything about that house. Expensive, beautiful, and cold. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the drops chase each other down the glass. Each one left a faint trail, fading as it fell. I wondered how many things in this house had faded like that. Conversations, promises, love. My suitcase waited by the door, half-zipped. It had been there since last night. I kept thinking maybe he'd change his mind. That maybe he'd call me into his office and tell me he didn't mean it. That I could stay until I figured things out. But my father never said things he didn't mean. That was his favorite pride, being decisive, even when it meant deciding to erase people. He walked in then, perfectly dressed, as if the world hadn't changed overnight. The sound of his shoes, polished leather against marble, had always unnerved me. It was the sound of a man used to being heard before he even spoke. "You're still here," he said. His voice wasn't angry. That almost made it worse. It was calm, detached, the way a man might speak about the weather or the market. His expression didn't change as his eyes landed on the suitcase. "I wanted to see you before I left," I said quietly. He nodded, walking past me toward the coffee machine. He poured his own cup, though I'd already made one for him. That was symbolic of our whole relationship, both of us standing in the same kitchen, making our own cups, pretending it was togetherness. "I meant what I said, Nora," he began, stirring the sugar. "You're young. You'll be fine. You've always been adaptable. That was his word for disposable. I wanted to ask if adaptability had been my mother's talent too, if that's why she'd left with nothing but a duffel bag and silence. But I didn't. I just looked at him, memorizing the way his cufflinks caught the light. Little diamonds, gifts from the board after the acquisition. He was now worth $400 million. And I was officially worth nothing. Not that I'd asked for money. I'd asked for time, for a place, for a sense that I still belonged here. But my father had always loved things more than people, and control more than love. "You're angry," he said, glancing up from his cup. "I'm not," I lied. "Just surprised?" He smiled faintly, like that answer confirmed something he already believed about me, that I didn't have the strength to hate him, that I was too soft, too emotional. "You have to learn. Nora," he continued, "the world doesn't owe you anything. I built this from nothing. You'll have to do the same." It was almost poetic, the way he could forget his own history. He hadn't built from nothing. He'd inherited the first factory from his father. I'd seen the pictures, the ledgers, the early loans that carried his name because of someone else's trust. But he told his story like a myth. He was the self-made man, the savior, the patriarch. I wondered if he truly believed it, or if he needed to. The rain grew heavier, tapping against the windows like it wanted in. I watched the way it distorted the reflection of the chandelier, all those tiny crystals bending light-like, tears trying to hold shape. I thought family was supposed to be the one thing that doesn't feel like business, I said finally. He didn't answer at first. He took a slow sip, watching the dark liquid swirl. "This isn't about business," he said eventually. "It's about maturity. You need to stand on your own." "I was trying to," I said. "You just never liked how I did it." That landed somewhere deep in him. I could tell. His jaw tightened. "Not much, but enough. You could have joined the company," he said. "You chose art. You chose feelings." "The world doesn't run on feelings, Nora," I smiled sadly. "No, Dad, but people do." That silence after was heavy. Not loud, not violent, just final. He looked down at his coffee again, as if the answer might be at the bottom. "I don't have time for this," he murmured. "I have a meeting with the new investors." Of course he did. There was always a meeting, always someone more important to listen to. When he turned to leave, I almost stopped him. Almost said, "Dad, I just wanted you to want me here." But the words wouldn't come. They never did. He'd built a lifetime of conversations where my role was to listen, not speak. I stood there long after he left, the echo of his footsteps fading through the hallway. That house, 12,000 square feet of glass, steel, and silence, had never felt so big. I walked to the living room and traced my hand along the edge of the piano. My mother used to sit there, her fingers soft on the keys, humming songs from before I was born. She used to tell me that houses remember sound, that even after people leave, the walls keep their voices. I wondered what this house remembered. Probably not laughter. The rain outside began to pour harder, and through the noise I heard the low hum of engines. The gardeners, the staff, the people who kept everything perfect. They moved through their routines like a well-rehearsed performance. Perfection had always been his religion. He believed in appearances, and somewhere in that belief he lost the softness that makes a person human. When I finally picked up my suitcase, my fingers were trembling. It wasn't from fear, it was from release. Every emotion I'd buried to keep his approval was surfacing, shaking through me like something alive. I walked to the front door and stopped for one last look. Everything gleamed. The staircase, the paintings, the gold-framed family photo by the entrance. I stared at that photo for a while. I was 12, my hand in his. My mother's smile caught mid-laugh. We looked like a family then. I didn't realize that even in that picture he wasn't looking at us. He was looking at the photographer, making sure we looked right. I wanted to take the photo with me. But I didn't. It belonged to the man who built a house, not a home. The rain was still falling as I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, hitting my face. It smelled of wet soil and change. As I stepped out, I felt something unclench inside me. Like a muscle I hadn't realized was always tense. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from him. Just 2 words, take care, no apology. No hesitation. Just a polite farewell, like a man ending a business meeting. I put the phone away and walked down the long driveway, my shoes splashing in puddles that reflected the house behind me. At the gate, I turned around one last time. The lights inside were still on, glowing through the rain. But it no longer looked grand. It looked like what it really was. A glass cage built for a man who couldn't see the people inside it. When the taxi arrived, the driver looked at me through the rearview mirror. "Rough night?" he asked gently. I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "Just a long time coming." As we drove away, the mansion blurred behind the raindrops on the window. And for the first time in my life, I realized leaving didn't always mean losing. Sometimes it was the only way to stop disappearing. The rain followed us down the hill, softening into mist. The city lights appeared ahead, glowing warm and imperfect. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and whispered to myself, "It's okay now. You're free." The sound of the tires on wet asphalt was the only reply, but it was enough. The first night in my new apartment was colder than I expected. Not because of the temperature, the heater worked fine, but because of the silence. It was a kind of quiet that wasn't empty, just unfamiliar. Like stepping into a space that hadn't learned your breathing rhythm yet. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom, cracked white walls, a window that faced a busy street. I'd found it online that same afternoon I left the house. The photos had made it look brighter, cleaner. In person, it smelled faintly of old paint and rain-soaked wood. But the key fit in my hand and the lock clicked softly behind me. That was enough. I set the suitcase down in the middle of the floor and just stood there, listening to the sound of traffic below. People laughing, horns honking, tires slicing through puddles. The city was alive, chaotic, and completely unaware that somewhere in it, a girl had just been exiled from her father's empire. I remember running my hand over the wall, feeling the uneven texture beneath my palm. It wasn't marble or silk. It was real, imperfect, human. I sat on the floor and opened my suitcase. I hadn't packed much, just enough clothes for a week, my sketchbook, and a photo of my mother that I'd kept hidden inside a book for years. She was standing by the ocean, smiling into the wind, hair wild and free. I placed it on the windowsill, facing the city lights. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there on the bare mattress, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of the last tenant's detergent. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look on my father's face, the calm certainty that he'd done the right thing. For him, everything was logic. For me, everything was feeling, that was always our war. But even in that emptiness, I felt something begin to shift. There was a strange peace in not being seen, a quiet kind of freedom in not being judged. I could breathe without waiting for someone to measure it. The next morning, I woke up early. The city outside was already awake. Delivery trucks rumbling, street vendors shouting. I boiled water on the stove and made coffee in a chipped mug I'd found in the cupboard. The handle had a crack, but it held. I smiled at that. Maybe we had something in common. That afternoon, I went out looking for work. I didn't care what kind. I just needed to move, to belong somewhere, even for a few hours. After a long day of rejection smiles and "we'll call you back," I stumbled into a small community kitchen tucked between two apartment buildings. The smell of soup and spices drifted through the doorway. Inside, volunteers moved and practiced rhythm, ladling, chopping, serving. A woman with silver hair and warm eyes looked up. "First time here?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Do you need help?" She smiled. "We always need help." That's how it began. By the end of the week, I was there every day, cleaning tables, chopping vegetables, serving food to people who looked like they'd lost far more than I ever could. And yet they smiled. They thanked me. Some even asked how I was. It's strange how kindness from strangers feels heavier than love from those who are supposed to know you best. It lands differently, unexpected, grounding. One man came in often, Tomas, wrinkled hands, weather-beaten face. He always sat at the corner table, folding napkins neatly before eating. One day he asked, "You new here, miss?" I nodded. He smiled. "You've got that look. Someone who's just learning how to start over." That made me laugh softly. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to people who've done it," he said. "You'll get the hang of it. The trick is to stop looking back." His words stayed with me long after he left. At night, when I returned to my apartment, I started drawing again, something I hadn't done in years. Not for anyone, just for me. Sketches of people I saw at the kitchen, faces full of quiet endurance. Each line steadied me. Each shade felt like reclaiming a voice I'd been told was too soft to matter. Days turned into weeks. The ache of being thrown out began to dull. The silence that once felt sharp now felt like safety. I could finally hear my own thoughts without his voice inside them. And then, exactly 24 hours after the company's sale was announced publicly, after his name had been printed in every business magazine, hailed as the man who won capitalism, my phone rang. It was 7:13 a.m. I remember because I was sitting on the floor eating toast, my sketchbook open beside me. The number flashing on the screen was unfamiliar. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another telemarketer, but something, instinct maybe, made me answer. "Hello?" There was silence, then a breath, and then the voice I knew better than my own heartbeat. "Nora?" I froze. "Dad?" His voice sounded different. Rough, uneven, the way it used to sound when he'd been awake all night working through numbers. But this time there was no control in it. "Just panic. Nora, He stopped as if words had suddenly turned against him. "Something's wrong. It's all gone. The accounts. The trusts. The holdings. I can't reach anyone. The board's silent. The lawyers," he took a shaky breath. "Someone stole everything. For a moment I didn't speak. I just listened to his fear, his unraveling. The sound of a man realizing he wasn't untouchable after all. "What do you mean everything?" I asked slowly. "The accounts have been emptied. My partner, Daniel, he's missing. He moved funds through one of the offshore branches. I don't understand how." I trusted him. That line, "I trusted him," stung deeper than I expected. Because he'd never said that about me. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Have you called the bank?" "The authorities?" "Yes, but I need you." Those words hit me like lightning. "I need you." It was the first time he'd ever said them. The irony was bitter. The man who told me emotions had no place in business now sounded like a man drowning in them. "I don't understand," I said carefully. "Why me?" "Because you're the only one who read the contracts thoroughly. You helped draft the compliance papers for the merger, remember? You understand how the offshore transfers work." I can't make sense of it." There was a trembling pause. Then softer. "Please, Nora." I closed my eyes. The rain had started again outside my window. It felt like déjà vu. Like the weather itself remembered. A year ago, I would have dropped everything to help him, desperate for approval. But now the request didn't sound like redemption. It sounded like irony, life folding back on itself to make a point. Still, I couldn't hang up. Not yet. Not on the man who had given me both my name and my scars. "I'll look at the files," I said finally. "Send me everything." His relief came through the line in one exhale. "Thank you, Nora. I knew I could count on you." But the truth was, he couldn't. Not in the way he once thought. I wasn't the same girl waiting by the door for his attention. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand. The toast had gone cold. My coffee was untouched. I looked at my mother's photo by the window. "She'd probably laugh at this," I whispered, because somehow the story had come full circle. The man who threw me out now calling for the daughter he underestimated. That day, I didn't go to the kitchen. I stayed home going through the files he'd sent, hundreds of pages, transfers, contracts, codes. It was chaos, but within that chaos I saw patterns, loopholes, familiar handwriting, and for the first time in my life, I realized something powerful. He had built an empire of control, but never built the wisdom to see what love could protect him from. By midnight, I knew what I had to do. I packed my laptop, locked the apartment, and called a cab. When the driver asked for the destination, I hesitated. Then said softly, 45 Crescent Lane. He nodded. "The big house up on the hill?" "Yes," I said, looking out at the rain beginning again. "That's the one." As the cab pulled away, I felt the same tension I had the day I left. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was something steadier. I wasn't going back for him. I was going back for closure. The rain followed me all the way back to Crescent Lane, as if it wanted to witness what came next. By the time the cab turned onto the long driveway, the mansion loomed ahead. The same tall iron gates, the same sweeping lights. But something was off. The guards were gone. The fountain wasn't running. Even from a distance, I could feel it. The energy had shifted. Once this place had pulsed with arrogance. Now it felt hollow. When I stepped out of the cab, my boots sank into the soft, rain-soaked gravel. The air smelled of wet earth and something else. Panic. I found him in his office. Or what was left of it. The once immaculate space was chaos. Papers everywhere. The safe open, its contents scattered. His laptop screen glowed with endless red warnings and frozen transfer pages. The empire he'd spent his life building was collapsing line by line, number by number. He didn't hear me come in. He was sitting at his desk, head in his hands. His shirt was wrinkled. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen him without a pressed collar. The man who'd once lectured me about discipline now looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. "Dad," I said quietly. He looked up sharply. For a second, relief flashed in his eyes, the kind that comes when the drowning finally sees the shore. "Nora," he breathed out. "You came." There was so much disbelief in those words, as if he couldn't imagine I'd still show up. Maybe part of me couldn't either. I walked closer, glancing at the chaos on his desk. Spreadsheets, legal notices, frozen accounts, emails with subject lines like urgent, fraud detected. "What happened?" I asked. He rubbed his temples, trying to hold himself together. "Daniel, my partner, he redirected the merger funds into a shell company. We traced some of it to Singapore, then Dubai, but it's gone now, overnight." He pushed a document toward me. "You can see for yourself. I've lost everything, everything." It was such a strange word coming from a man who once told me that emotions were nothing, that people were replaceable. But now, stripped of his armor, I could see what everything really meant to him. Control, power, reputation. All the illusions he'd mistaken for love. "How did you not see it?" I asked softly. "You signed every approval. You read every clause." "I trusted him," he said again, voice cracking. He was like a son to me. A bitter smile rose in me before I could stop it. "Interesting," I said. "You always wanted a son." He looked at me then, really looked. Maybe for the first time in years. "Nora," he whispered, "I didn't mean—" But he stopped. Maybe because he realized he did mean it once. I pulled out my laptop and started scanning the documents. My hands moved on instinct. My brain went into focus. All the years I'd spent helping with small projects, reading fine print just to prove I could be useful, were suddenly worth something. He watched me in silence as I worked. Occasionally he muttered something, a date or a transaction, and I nodded. The tension in the room thickened. Two strangers sharing the same blood, bound only by disaster. After hours of digging, I found a trail. A pattern of coded transfers and digital signatures. He didn't just take your money, I said. He took your access. Look at this. He rerouted your credentials through a holding account under your own name. He's laundering it as your authorization. His face went pale. He's framing me. Essentially, yes. He stood up suddenly, pacing, pulling at his tie. My God, Nora, they'll think I did this. The investors, the media, everyone. It's all gone. His voice broke on that last word. And then, for the first time in my life, I saw my father cry. Not a quiet, dignified tear, but the kind that shakes a man's body. The kind that undoes years of pretending. It didn't feel satisfying. It felt human. I wanted to hate him. But hate requires energy, and I was too tired for that. Instead, I just watched him. The man who'd thrown me out to protect his perfection, now reduced to the one thing he feared most: imperfection. When his breathing finally steadied, he whispered, "You could have ignored my call." I almost did, I said honestly. Why didn't you? I thought about that for a long moment. Then I said, because you're still my father. And because walking away is one thing, but letting someone drown when you can reach them is another. He nodded slowly, shame moving across his face like a shadow. I don't deserve your help. No, I said. You don't. The words hung there, not cruel, just honest. I turned my laptop toward him. You can still recover part of it. There's evidence here that Daniel used traceable accounts. It'll take time, but it's not hopeless. He blinked, disbelief giving way to something softer. Humility. I don't even know where to begin. Then start with me, I said. Let me handle this. But this time, you listen. For the next few hours, I guided him. How to report the fraudulent trails, how to freeze remaining accounts, who to contact. He didn't interrupt once, not once. The silence was unfamiliar but comforting. Like maybe finally we were speaking the same language. Truth. As dawn crept through the curtains, the rain stopped. The sky outside turned pale blue, the color of quiet after chaos. When I closed the last file, my hands trembled slightly. Exhaustion, maybe. Or release. He sat back in his chair, eyes red, face lined. You saved me, he said quietly. I shook my head. No, I just showed you what was always there. The part of you that forgot to listen. He didn't answer. Just looked at me like he was trying to memorize something before it disappeared again. After a while, he said, I don't know how to fix what I've done to you. I smiled faintly. You can't fix it. You can only understand it. The sun rose higher, painting light across the wreckage of his office. Torn papers, empty coffee cups, a half-broken empire. It was strangely beautiful in a tragic way. Like a cathedral after fire. Ruined, but honest. He reached for my hand then, hesitant, trembling. I'm sorry, he whispered. And maybe, for the first time, he meant it. I let him hold my hand for a moment before pulling away. You'll figure the rest out, I said. He nodded. There was no fight left in him. Just a man finally seeing the cost of everything he thought he'd won. As I stood to leave, he said quietly, Nora. Thank you, I didn't turn around. You're welcome. But in my heart, I added the words I didn't say aloud. This isn't about saving you, Dad. It's about freeing me. When I stepped outside, the morning air felt lighter. The birds had returned. The world hadn't ended, just changed shape. Behind me, I heard the slow creak of the mansion's front door closing. It sounded for once like an ending that might finally lead to peace. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I walked. Past the iron gates, past the street where the marble sidewalks still glistened with rain. Every step felt like untying a knot, one that had been in my chest for years. The city was waking up. Shops lifting their shutters, people chasing buses, life continuing as if empires hadn't just crumbled. That's the thing about the world. It doesn't pause for anyone's fall. It just keeps turning. When I reached the little cafe on Alder Street, the one where I used to hide after arguments with my father, I ordered black coffee and sat by the window. The same seat. The same cracked mug. But I wasn't the same girl. For the first time, the silence around me didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I replayed last night in my head, his shaking hands, his apology, the way he said thank you like it hurt. And part of me wanted to hold on to that moment forever, not because it fixed anything, but because it proved something. He was capable of breaking. And maybe, just maybe, that meant he was capable of changing. But his redemption wasn't my responsibility anymore. That realization came like a quiet truth, gentle, steady, undeniable. I had spent years trying to earn his love, his approval, his pride. Now I finally understood. I didn't need any of it to have worth. The sun spilled through the window, warming the back of my hands. I smiled at the smallness of the moment. No mansions. No wealth, no power. Just me, a cup of coffee, and peace that didn't need anyone else's permission. When my phone buzzed, I already knew who it was. Dad. They're investigating Daniel. I couldn't have done it without you. I'll keep you updated. Maybe we can talk. Sometime. I stared at the message for a while. The old version of me would have answered immediately. Desperate, hopeful. But not this time. Instead, I typed one sentence. I'm glad you're taking responsibility. I wish you peace, Dad. And then I turned my phone off. Outside, the sky had cleared completely, leaving only a pale trace of morning clouds. I paid my bill and stepped out into the light. The air smelled clean, alive. I walked without a destination, through streets where no one knew my name, past strangers who didn't care who my father was or how much money he'd lost. It was liberating, in a way that wealth could never be. At one point, I stopped at a bookstore, the kind that still smelled like paper and ink. I ran my fingers across the spines, found an old poetry collection, and bought it with the last 20 in my wallet. That small act felt like a declaration. I choose simple things now. Later that afternoon, I returned to my small apartment, the one he said wasn't good enough for a grant. The walls were still plain, the furniture secondhand. But everything here was mine, bought with my choices, not his expectations. I placed the poetry book on the table, opened the window, and let the light pour in. Somewhere in the distance, I could still imagine him sitting in that office, staring at the ruins of what he'd built. But that was his journey now, not mine. I poured myself a glass of water, took a long breath, and said it out loud. Softly, but clearly enough for the room to remember. I forgive you. But I'm free now. There was no music, no cinematic swell. Just stillness. Just truth. And that was enough. Outside, the world continued. Cars passing, birds returning to rooftops, laughter spilling from open windows. Life, imperfect and beautiful, moved forward. So did I. Because sometimes the most powerful ending isn't revenge, or even reconciliation. It's walking away without bitterness. It's knowing that you can look back and feel nothing but calm. As the last light of evening slid across my floor, I closed the door to my apartment. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like shutting something out. It felt like opening something new.